Hello, I'm Marc Sumner, host of the Channel Chat podcast show, and today I have Kathryn Bennett, the EMEA Channel Director from Dataminr in the studio. How are we doing, Kathryn?
I'm fantastic, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me along.
On Valentine's Day.
I know, what a day, look at that.
Absolutely. Now, normally, Kathryn, when I go through, I have a guest in the studio, I normally have a bit of a scour through their LinkedIn profile and a couple of things will come up. And two things have come up today, and I'm going to go over each one of them. But first, the first one that's come up is this. You are, for the listeners, you're not Catherine Louise, that's your second name, isn't it?
It is,
you have written books, and I've got one here. So first of all, tell me about that. How did that come about?
I think anybody who knows me knows that I can't sit still, even for 5 minutes, very short attention span. And I think, going back to when I originally started writing was lockdown. I think to get away from the monotony of sort of getting up every day, sitting in front of your laptop, doing your work, cooking dinner, going to bed, getting up, it was very samey. It's particularly for me anyway, in kind of my role and obviously IT. So I thought, you know what, loved English, did it at school, did it A-level, have a kind of a go at writing. I loved it. It kind of took you away from everything that was happening outside. But what I did is I sent it off to a couple of publishers and thought, well, let's see how we go. First 10,000 words of a couple of ideas that I had. And a few weeks later, I got a response saying, loved it. When can we have the final, the finished version? I thought, okay. Wasn't expecting that. So I did, obviously, went back to them, loved it. And it's kind of evolved from there, really. I mean, it takes a long, long time. So obviously going back, 5 years, I've learnt a lot. I think Esmeralda King gave me something that I could combine the writing, but also with kind of cybersecurity from my role and from the industry and so on. So, yeah, book number 3 and book number 4 should be out in this summer. So, fingers crossed.
The second thing I looked at through your LinkedIn profile was I noticed that you studied at the National Institute of Counselling. So, is this going to be a bit more of a therapy session rather than a channel chat?
I promise I won't ask too many questions and turn it into kind of like a therapy session. But, the reason that I really liked psychology and, counselling and so on was because, whatever role you're in, especially when it's, customer facing or, salespeople, channel, any of those things, I think it's really important to understand people and things like their mannerisms, their behaviour, why do they purchase, what's relevant or what's in it for them. So I kind of started to look at psychology as a means for probably more connecting with people, being more successful in my career and so on. And also very important when you're looking at managing people, because we're all so different. And if you don't get people, I think that can kind of sometimes be, kind of almost like a blocker. So for me, counselling, psychology, human behaviour, all that kind of stuff, I just found it fascinating. So, yeah, I won't turn it into a counselling session just yet.
Talking of psychology then, what was the thought process of going into cyber? Because am I right in thinking your first job was in Hollyport? I used to live in Hollyport, actually, so I know the area quite well.
Beautiful,
nice part of the world. Axial Systems, is that your first venture into it?
Going way, way back into my career, I started off in IT, telecom, so it was always quite technical. And the reason I kind of came into that was my dad was in telecoms and technical and IT and that kind of thing. Axial Systems, fantastic company. It was more kind of things like network monitoring, packet capture, again, kind of very technical. But really, the buzzword at that time was cyber. Everything was moving so much quicker. Telecoms had been around for many, many years. And, don't get me wrong, it was great. But sometimes you have to kind of move with the times, move with the technology. Cyber, for me, was something that it was new, it was fresh. People were starting to talk about it. It's becoming more important. You then obviously had the introduction of things like CISOs, head of security and so on. So that's where I kind of made the journey into something new and kind of going more into security and so on. So that was probably many, many moons ago, but that was probably my first kind of introduction into the world of cyber, really.
Were you technical? Did you have a good grasp of the technology?
I like to know how things work, but when it gets a little bit too technical, I'm kind of like, that's pre-sales or that's the solutions team. So I do like to know how things work, and I like a little bit of it, but I still firmly back into kind of the sales and the channel. It's where I'm more comfortable.
Now, Kathryn, you're probably the first person in the studio that I've had from a really AI-focused company business. So What does AI mean to you? What do we actually think AI is?
AI, if we kind of go right back to the beginning, AI I think is where a lot of people tend to deem as, self-driven cars, Siri. It is probably the biggest buzzword at the moment that we had since things like cloud. And for many, many years, and I'll kind of go into the history a little bit, but for many, many years, we've kind of looked at AI as something that's been quite new and something that people are investing in, adopting in, and so on. But actually, and this again kind of takes me back to the sort of cybersecurity days when everybody's mentioning it, I thought, this is quite interesting now, people are starting to adopt it. But I wanted to know a little bit more about if you start to Google AI, it starts to talk about, for decades we've been... In actual fact, it's more like centuries that people have started to talk about artificial intelligence. So if we go right back to kind of 400 BC, artificial intelligence was deemed by the Greeks as called like automons, and it was around kind of mechanical pigeons or mechanical birds, and it was the first thought into the way that either humans or mechanical instruments can do things without human intervention. If we fast forward into kind of more modern times, if we go back to Leonardo da Vinci back in 1495, he then started, if you look at some of his scriptures and his drawings and so on, he then started to look at things like mechanical knights, mechanical lions, and it was all intricate systems of pulleys and systems and things that could do things, obviously, again, without human interaction. Fast forward even further into kind of modern day times, if we look at kind of, 1921, it was the first check play or, instruction where we had steam-powered robots that obviously could move around and do certain things with kind of combustion. Moving into 1950 was Alan Turing. I don't know if you've heard of things like the Turing test, but basically what that means is you're testing machines or computers more commonly to see how well they are against a human. Then 1952 was the first kind of checkers game that was produced against humans, obviously. 1955 was John McCarthy, and he then deemed the first, or the coined phrase artificial intelligence. So when a lot of people talk about AI, they refer back to John McCarthy. So 1952, kind of dabbling in a little bit of artificial intelligence there. There was a kind of, the industry saw it as, this is actually quite interesting. With artificial intelligence, we could perhaps potentially replace humans. We could start to look at, brain intelligence. But there was kind of a lull, and they call it the AI winter, where not really much happened. Governments didn't see it as kind of a big investment. They didn't really see the return until it kind of hit the 1990s. So I suppose the most important history here in terms of artificial intelligence is, if we look at 1997, there were two big things that happened. One was speech recognition, which, we kind of take it as a given now. We're on the phone and we've kind of been putting in a queue. That's kind of speech recognition. And also chatbots, or chatterbots as they used to call them. We see them everywhere now. We go, oh, for goodness sake, I just want to speak to a human. I don't want what was called a chatterbot then. It's now obviously shortened to chatbot. And I think, that's where it's become really, really clever. So we look at, 2003, NASA introduced the first two robots. 2011, Siri. Some people love Siri, some people don't love Siri. But that's really where artificial has really started to change. And I guess as we move into the modern world, we start to talk about 2016 was the first civilized robot called Sophia. I don't know if you've kind of seen it, but if you really start to look at the robots from 2016 onwards, they then have, emotion, they can, speech recognition, they can then, really start to converse with humans. 2017, there are actually two chatbots that were created to converse with each other. But what happened was they actually surpassed the English language and then started to create their own language. So this is where artificial intelligence becomes quite scary in the modern world, where even though there's some part of human integration and intervention to create certain things, we're now moving into a world where they're kind of taking their own initiative. They're really taking that language and then turning it into their own. So kind of the future of AI, I find absolutely fascinating. Which direction is it going to go in? What are we going to start to see now? Even to the point where artificial intelligence is now surpassing humans in terms of things like reading and comprehension tests. Obviously, we see things like ChatGPT and all these things that are kind of really driving intelligence. But I think the rate at which it's rapidly changing is something that is, I think, quite scary.
Sounds it. Yes, it sounds it,
Yeah.
Kathryn. With your background from mainly sort of cybersecurity focused businesses, what attracted you to Dataminr?
As I mentioned before, when I started looking at cybersecurity, it was new, it was exciting, it was something that was, constantly changing. For probably the last year or so, artificial intelligence was the buzzword, as I mentioned previously. And, we've seen the emergence of people using, students perhaps maybe using it, people in the office starting to use it. And for me, artificial intelligence, if I look at somebody like Dataminr, it wasn't something that was new for them. They started back in 2009 with the ability to deliver insights on information or events, or critical events and critical information in real time. So for me, this isn't something new for Dataminr. They've established their own proprietary AI platform, and with the ability for 50 plus large learning or large language models, for anybody who knows that, it basically takes information from over 1 million public sources globally. So if you can imagine the sheer volume of data and information that they're collecting, it's terabytes per day. Now, if you were to translate that into kind of human intervention, the data that they collect and analyse in an hour would take 60 analysts working 24/7 for a whole year to do the same thing. So you can just imagine the kind of the difference between it. So for me, when I started looking at Dataminr, I was like, this is a really fascinating company. They've been doing this for a long time. Now, obviously, they're building on that. I suppose just to kind of elaborate on that, there's 3 different types of AI that Dataminr focus on, really. The first one is predictive AI, and that gives us the ability to really use the data that it's collecting and be able to kind of correlate it, analyse it, and so on. Generative AI is where it takes that data and then produces it into actionable alerts. So if you look at things like newsrooms and news studios, they're taking that data in real time and then trying to figure out, okay, a first alert or a high tier alert, do we report on that? There's so much data obviously they can use. And then what's even more important at the moment is what's called regen AI. That has the ability to constantly update situations that are evolving. So if you could imagine, for example, there's a fire. People don't just want to know there's a fire. They want to know, has it cleared? Has it improved? Has it got worse? How do we respond to that? And that's, I think, the intelligence that companies need to really report on. So, again, from looking at Dataminr, it was like, this is new, this is exciting. Where's it actually going to take it in the future?
Exciting company, yeah. I can tell why it'd be an exciting opportunity for you to join. Let's talk about why you joined and the role you joined to do.
Sure.
So a channel director or alliances director, what's the remit? What are you supposed to be doing?
Gosh, where do I start?
$1 million question is that?
I mean, again, I started back in 2015 with a company called FireEye. I'm sure everybody's heard of. Dave DeWalt, one of the kind of the biggest players in the industry. FireEye for me, and being in a channel role, was the ability to take all of my experience from sales and turn that into not just obviously selling to somebody, but actually taking a partner and looking at marketing strategy, business strategy, looking at kind of technical enablement and really growing each partner in terms of their sales environment. So I think personally, channel is so much more than just sales. You're working with organisations to really develop and kind of grow them and to create a really established relationship. Gosh, makes me feel really old, but obviously 10 plus years in channel, I really wanted some kind of career progression, but also to kind of the experience from channel, look at developing that across EMEA. So obviously a bigger territory, more continents, and as anybody that kind of works in channel, it's difficult enough when you're looking at UK and Ireland to then look at, France and the DACH region and the Middle East and, all of those different languages, regulations. It's a little bit like the US and having each individual state. So for me, and growing the kind of the channel role from an EMEA's perspective with Dataminr, was exciting. You know, they're an established organisation, but it was all about growing the channel from a Dataminr's perspective. And I think that the second piece here was, my manager is Matthew Harrell, VP of kind of partner operations globally. You know, vast experience, big background in terms of cyber organisations. For him to move from cyber over to an AI company, that's what kind of exciting me. A lot of people that were moving from cyber to AI thought, this is kind of a direction I want to go in, really. So, you know, the channel role for me has evolved massively, but it's about taking it to that next level, really, for Dataminr.
How do you do that? Because how do you actually establish a channel and get it growing for an AI company when maybe lots of partners out there aren't really get up to it? So how do you establish a channel?
Very good question again, and I think one is obviously having a team around you. So I have a fantastic team that obviously work around us, from the kind of the marketing to the technical enablement, technical alliances, and what that means is, again, you know, working with distribution has been a fantastic piece with us as well. But really, you're almost starting from the beginning and saying, right, okay, what do we want to achieve here? What are the kind of the fastest growing territories that we need to focus on? What do we need to deliver? Where do we need to be relevant? And I think one of those key things for us was developing a successful and realistic partner program. And that's something obviously it's, you know, literally just launched. But again, the marketing team behind that to create a realistic partner program has been really, really key. I think also the wider sales team, you know, I've worked for a couple of vendors where, do we go partners? Do we go channel? Do we not? Do we do some things direct? Do we tend to go all in or all out? I think sometimes vendors don't have that quite right. I think you either need to be all in or all out. And that has been a really strong supportive message right from the top of Dataminr, and saying we are 100% channel focused. Everything will go through our partners and distribution partners, you know, globally. And this is what we're going to do to help the sales team kind of migrate over. So I think, again, that was something for me that was, they are supportive. This is where we're going. This is
exciting.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, for me, all in.
Now, I know you launched, I looked on your LinkedIn profile, I know it was launched quite recently, a few days ago. Now, normally when I see someone's partner program, I think, well, it's just going to be a few more incentives or a few more tools, or they'll rebrand and recolor the actual website or whatever.
Yeah.
What makes a partner program right? What makes it successful?
I think there's a couple of answers to this one. I think firstly, it's making it relevant. I've seen so many, as you say, so many partner programs and so many portals that you go into and you think, gosh, you know, one, how do I even navigate this kind of platform? If you look at a partner, especially some of the bigger ones, they have thousands, maybe more thousands of vendors that they're working with. So you can imagine that's multiple platforms that they're going to be logging into and finding it. So I think one is the ease of, you know, how users are easily able to navigate around the platform. So obviously when we were testing the platform, it was making sure that, you know, easy drop downs, nice, easy to navigate, able to, you know, submit deal registrations, etc. It was nice and simple. So I think that's the first one. The second one is making sure that things like incentives, spiffs, collaboration with the partners was relevant again. And I think the final piece here is, you know, from a partner's ability to be able to sell the technology that they're working on. And that, I think, is something that we've received. I mean, again, this was only launched a couple of days ago, and we've already had such a fantastic response in terms of, you know, partners wanting to join, but also those that have been in and gone, this is actually really cool, really easy, really intuitive, and something that we think we can drive forward. So I think it's making it relevant rather than what we think is relevant to a partner.
And Kathryn, how do you make it relevant when you're going across different regions? Because if you sort of say in the UK, you might be able to roll things out in the UK and it'll probably be similar. You might get feedback from partners, but it'll be similar. But you said DAC region, you know, EMEA, you know, Dubai, could be wherever.
Yeah.
How do you make it relevant for those different regions?
I think research and analysis has been a big part in this because, you know, before we launched it, it was a case of, you know, for the DACH region, okay, what is relevant to you? And also having things like resources in, you know, natural languages. But more importantly, we have, you know, global offices, we have local resources in each one of those. So I think sitting down also with the sellers, with the partners in each territory and also distribution again, is understanding, well, okay, what maybe might work in the UK and Ireland doesn't necessarily work in Germany or France or so on. So really understanding the territories that you're working with and understanding what is relevant to them, I think, is important. And I suppose the final piece here is actually gathering feedback from things that have and haven't worked in the past, because again, I think sometimes as a vendor, you're very much kind of in your own bubble. You're saying, this is what we're going to launch. Well, okay, the partners go, that didn't really work for us. Or, imagine launching a spiff or a program that wasn't really successful. So I think, initial research, analysis, what has worked in the past, and then rolling out that across each one of the territories, really.
Let's bring it up to date, Kathryn. What does AI mean, do you think, for the future of cybersecurity?
It's going to be interesting, not only from a business perspective, but also obviously from an individual's perspective. We're getting asked questions now, will it replace people? Will it replace teams and departments? Will it replace things like compliance and regulation? I think there needs to be some degree of control around it, because if we suddenly start replacing things before we're too ready, I think it's going to create a long-term kind of mayhem. So I think there may be some roles that are replaced by artificial intelligence. I mean, it's kind of where we were back in the 1980s with things like the actual internet, where it kind of exploded, but then you have the internet and then you have things like the dark and deep web. Where does that go? Where do we kind of segregate? And is there a kind of a grey area between the two? And I'm also finding that whilst a lot of companies are adopting it, or a lot of industries, if you look at things like healthcare, obviously fantastic for looking at medicine, kind of looking at cures and those kind of things. But I think in some organisations, they're actually saying, well, hang on a second, I know we've got AI, we've got ChatGPT, but actually I want you as the individual to create this. I don't want us using AI or ChatGPT to kind of create everything, because there needs that some kind of human intervention. So I think it's going to be interesting where it goes to. I think some roles could potentially be replaced and are already being replaced. I mean, look at things like searches for particular roles in organisations. Will that change? But I think sometimes it can also miss a lot of things. So yeah, it will be definitely interesting to see where it goes in industries, but I think also it could create certain roles within organisations as well.
Yeah, where do you see the opportunities? Because there's a major difference between knowing about AI and integrating it. So
Yes.
How do we bridge that gap? How do businesses start thinking about AI solutions into their security protocols?
Very similar to, I think, what different industries are doing. They're kind of saying, well, look, we see in this particular space a particular opportunity for AI, but then in these particular roles, I think it's non-relevant. So I think in some of the intelligence parts of an organisation, AI would be very good. If we start to look at government organisations, I don't see that there's a way around not using AI because of the sheer data, analysts, the sheer amount of people and volume. I mean, we already know in things like, healthcare and NHS, that there's a big gap between, things like waiting times, between people obviously needing appointments and so on. AI could really bridge a gap, I think, from that perspective. But then I think from other industries and other points of view, I mean, there's a big debate, and this is kind of completely going off track here, but I actually saw a video yesterday of AI or a mechanical arm in a pub scenario where you would kind of punch in and say, I don't know, I'd like a vodka and Coke, for example, or I'd like a cocktail. You pay for it, and this mechanical arm is kind of taking drinks, serving it to you, and there you go. Do people want that? I mean, I get that it's replacing people and it's perhaps maybe a little bit more efficient, but surely the reason for you to go to a pub is to speak to people, to be with people, to kind of interact. If that's going to be the case, why wouldn't you sit at home and just have a drink on your own? So I think there's use cases for and against it. I get it's moving, but actually what do people want or what do people need?
Yeah, because it's an interesting debate there, because you mentioned it earlier. Experts sort of say, AI is going to surpass human intelligence within, the next 18 months, 24 months?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that prediction? Is that quite scary in some ways?
Yes. In short, yes. It's evolving at such a quick pace. It's doubling every single year. And if we're already at that stage where it's surpassing human intelligence, where are we going to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years' time? I think that is is super scary. But again, if we go back to things like cloud and cyber and so, it has evolved so quickly in some areas, but then not so quickly in others. So I think that for me is the biggest thing. Whilst it can really take off, I think we almost need to kind of restrict it in some areas so that it doesn't cause, quite the...
Do you think that will happen? We've started this bandwagon now of AI. It's moving forward. It's just like, can we hold it back?
I think the thing for me, and this is kind of personal opinion here, you look at films, and for me, when I look at films, that I watched perhaps maybe 10, 15 years ago, a lot of that I thought, God, that'd be really cool if, we had certain things that did this. Now, if I actually go back and look at those films, I think, God, we are actually doing these things now. They've happened. The films that we're watching now that are taking place, I think are scary for the future. Are we going to be looking at those again in 10 years' time and thinking, that's actually that's happening now, which we didn't think was happening before. So I think that's the situation for me. Where is this actually going to go? And I think if it falls into the wrong hands, people can use it for the very, very wrong reasons. So there needs to be some kind of restriction to hold certain things back.
Yeah, let's talk about those sort of threats out there. As someone sort of deeply involved in AI and security, what advice would you give to organisations looking to stay ahead of those threats or prevent them?
Yeah, I think you need to use AI. If you look at the deep and dark web, you're looking at threat actors that are using AI to create, ransomware and lots of viruses now. The only way to combat that really, I think, is by the same approach, by, OSINT and AI's perspective. So I think for me, organisations need to be thinking about it. They need to be looking at it. And there are so many people that are discussing AI. There's so many talks. There's so many platforms. I think they really need to educate themselves on actual AI. And a lot of organisations saying, yeah, we're adopting it. Yes, we're talking about AI. What they really mean is things like ChatGPT and some of the kind of the packages or software packages that are creating AI software. What they're not really thinking about is more the kind of capabilities, what is happening, kind of on the darker side. If I actually look at Dataminr, that is the ability to really stay ahead of the curve, to have the ability to provide intelligence on, emerging, events that are happening in real time. I think that is something that is, organisations need. And I suppose the difference that we're going into here is people think of artificial intelligence kind of in the kind of cyber world, but we've got two different kind of areas here. We've got the physical side and then we've got the cyber side. So again, if I kind of refer this back to Dataminr, the physical piece is, if I imagine I've got a data centre somewhere, I really want to know about what's happening around that data centre because I'm looking at, the criticality of perhaps maybe our data or, the physical property of the organisation. I'm also looking at executive safety. If I've got an exec who's flying from London to New York, I want to know, are there going to be delays? Is there anything that's going to affect their travel? Let's take a manufacturing organisation. If they're looking at transporting products or certain materials from one location to another, is that going to affect our time delay on getting products onto shelves, for example? So really organisations are kind of thinking about artificial intelligence that can give them real-time information on critical data. The second piece, when we do start to look at kind of cyber and artificial intelligence, is really when you're looking at domain protection. Somebody on the deep and dark web, are they selling our credentials? Are they talking about us? Is there perhaps maybe a ransomware attack that we found or perhaps maybe a vulnerability that we should be acting on now? Third party risk, obviously that's a huge thing at the moment, things like regulations. We're talking about DORA, which is obviously the kind of the EU regulation, NIS, there's a lot of things that are impacting third party vulnerabilities. And again, if we're not kind of looking at, okay, who's in our tech stack? What are we using? Are there any vulnerabilities that we're not aware of? And then kind of more into the kind of the cyber risk and environment. Organisations need to ask themselves, what is the difference between having information now and having information in, say, a couple of hours, a day, or even a week's time? The ability to act on that is critical. If you don't have that information in real time, I think that's the biggest thing here. And if I look at somebody like Dataminr, there are three real things. The speed, obviously, again, in real time, that You look at a lot of organisations, they could probably do this with several analysts, but the difference is AI, real-time, speed, scale, they need to know now. I think the kind of the scope, the ability to search on terms, what's happening here, what's happening, globally. Can I look at an area that's important to this particular organisation? And then I think the third thing is obviously the scalability. Like I mentioned, to have an organisation that has developed this since 2009 versus people who are just looking at this now and developing it, that's the real difference, I think, in what would it cost your organisation to know now versus, later on, I guess.
Kathryn, in your role currently, Channel Director, Alliances Director, who do you spend more time with? Is it partners or is it distribution? What alliances are you actually trying to create?
Bit of both, I think, really. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do the role that I'm doing without distribution.
Right.
There again, kind of going back to a Dataminr perspective, scalability, they know the industry. They've worked with these partners, for many, many years. They have the relationships. So I'd say probably 50% of my time, distribution, very, very key part in kind of the growth here. The second piece, I think, with the partners as well is I would love to spend more time, but obviously that's what the team is there for, to develop the relationships with partners. But I think also if you're not spending the time with them, you're not understanding their business, you're not understanding how they're growing, you don't understand what's relevant to them. And I mean, there's so many partners out there. They're all very different. It's almost kind of like having children. One's kind of, and sometimes they behave like no. It's what's important to them. They all have different vendors they work with. They all have different technologies in their kind of their environment. They have different territories. Sometimes they have different sales methodologies. So I think really, kind of making sure you're understanding your partner network. And I think this is the biggest mistake that a lot of vendors make, is that they go out and they just suddenly recruit hundreds of partners. One, unless you've got a huge team behind you to manage that, it's not scalable and it won't work. I think really the answer here is a selection of focused and strategic partners that are bought into you just as much as you're bought into them. That's what makes it successful. Really understanding them, having the time to spend with them, to enable them, to grow them. And then finally, obviously, the distribution piece to kind of lead into that. So I don't know if that answered your question kind of correctly, but really, I think spending the time, I wish I had more time to kind of spend with all of them. But that's the benefit of obviously having the team around you to kind of to grow it strategically.
My last question, and this could be...
It sounds like a big one.
Yeah. And it's your opinion. In 2025... which company is the one to watch, or you're particularly interested to see how they get on? That could be a competitor, it could be another vendor, it could be a distribution partner, or it could be a partner. One company you think, do you know what, Mark, I think they're going to do quite well this year.
Can I say Dataminr?
No.
Gosh, that's a really difficult one.
One you're particularly thinking, do you know what, I think they're going to do quite well. Or it could be a competitor, another vendor.
Do you know what, I'm really struggling to answer that. I think partner-wise... Do you know what? I'm going to mention one here, and this is not favouritism, but I think Bytes, I've worked with previously. I think they're very exciting in terms of where they're heading for 2025, and the team again have been really open again to working with Dataminr and really kind of changing the curve. They've really adopted AI. That's not to say that other partners haven't, but I think the way that they've worked with us, with distribution, and to really kind of be a game changer. I'm actually quite interested to see how they pan out for this year, and again working with Dataminr to kind of really take it on leaps and bounds. So no favourites, but I think they could be a really strong one to kind of watch in the new year.
Kathryn, you've been a great guest. Thanks so much for your time.
Hopefully it won't be the last.